The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Tombstone, Arizona, and Clara Whitmore pressed herself against the wooden wall of the general store, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest as another body crumpled to the ground just 20 feet away. It was June of 1882, and death had become as common as the scorching sun that beat down on the desert town. But Clara had never grown accustomed to the way life could be snuffed out in an instant, the way men fell like broken dolls when bullets found their mark. She clutched her basket tighter, the eggs inside forgotten as she watched the crowd gather around the fallen man, his blood seeping into the dirt while his killer casually holstered his revolver and walked away without a backward glance. Clara was 22 years old, a school teacher who had arrived in Tombstone 8 months earlier with dreams of bringing education to the rough frontier town, but those dreams had been tempered by the harsh reality of life, in a place where disputes were settled with guns rather than words. She had seen 6 men killed in shootouts since her arrival, had heard the screams of widows and the cries of orphaned children, had watched as the undertaker grew rich from the constant stream of bodies that needed burying. Her hands trembled as she finally forced herself to move, to walk past the gathering crowd with her eyes fixed firmly on the ground, unwilling to see another face frozen in death's final expression. She had made it perhaps 10 steps when rough hands grabbed her arm, spinning her around with such force that her basket went flying, eggs shattering against the hard-packed earth. Clara found herself staring into the bloodshot eyes of a man she recognized as one of the cowboys who worked for the Clanton family, his breath reeking of whiskey even though it was barely past noon. He grinned at her, revealing yellowed teeth, and his grip on her arm tightened until she gasped in pain. Well, what do we have here?" the man slurred, his other hand reaching up to touch her face. "Pretty little thing, like you shouldn't be walking around alone. Dangerous out here, you know." Clara tried to pull away, but his fingers dug into her flesh like iron clamps. She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound could emerge, the man was suddenly yanked backward with such force that he lost his grip on her entirely. Clara stumbled, catching herself against a hitching post, and looked up to see a tall figure standing between her and her attacker. The cowboy who had intervened wore dust-covered denim and a dark hat pulled low over his eyes. But even in the harsh afternoon light, Clara could see the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders as he faced down the drunk man. His hand hovered near the revolver at his hip, not touching it, but making his readiness clear. "The lady doesn't want your company," the stranger said, his voice low and steady, carrying an authority that made Clara's breath catch. "Best you move along." The drunk cowboy spat in the dirt, his hand moving toward his own weapon. "This ain't your business, stranger. The girl and I were just getting acquainted." "I am making it my business," the man replied, and something in his tone made the drunk hesitate. "You have 3 seconds to walk away. 1. For a moment, Clara thought the situation would escalate into another shooting, another body in the street, another life ended over something senseless. Her protector had only counted to 2 when the drunk seemed to think better of his chances. With a muttered curse, he turned and staggered away, disappearing into the saloon across the street. The tall cowboy turned to face Clara, and for the first time she got a clear look at him. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray with flecks of blue that seemed to shift in the light. A scar ran along his left cheekbone, white against his tanned face, and his dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. He removed his hat, revealing more of his features, and Clara felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now, concerned. Clara shook her head, finding her voice. "No, thank you so much. If you had not intervened, I do not know what would have happened." He glanced at the broken eggs scattered on the ground, then back at her face. "I am glad I was here. This town has gotten worse since the Earps left. Too many men think they can do whatever they please without consequence." He paused, then extended his hand. "Name is James Cordell. Most folks call me Cord." She took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip tempered by obvious care not to hurt her. "Clara Whitmore, I teach at the schoolhouse." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or interest. "I have heard about you. Folks say you are doing good work with the children, teaching them to read and write proper." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "I try. Someone needs to give them a chance at a better life than this." She gestured toward the crowd that was finally dispersing, the body being carried away toward the undertaker's establishment. Cord's expression darkened. Too much killing. Too much blood. He looked back at her, and Clara saw something haunted in his eyes, a pain that ran deep. "Let me walk you home, Miss Whitmore. It is not safe for you to be alone out here." She should have said no. Propriety demanded that she decline, that she not allow a strange man to escort her through town. But propriety seemed like a luxury in a place where death waited around every corner, where drunken cowboys grabbed women in broad daylight. Clara nodded, and they began walking together through the dusty streets of Tombstone. As they walked, Cord told her about himself. He had come to Arizona 3 years earlier, working as a ranch hand and occasional scout for the Army when they needed someone who knew the territory. He had grown up in Texas, had fought in the last years of the Civil War as a teenager, had seen more death than any man should. Clara listened, hearing the weight of experience in his words, the weariness of someone who had witnessed too much violence. "Why do you stay?" she asked, as they turned onto the quieter street where she rented a small room above the Mercantile. "If the killing bothers you so much, why not go somewhere more civilized?" Cord was quiet for a long moment. "I have been asking myself that same question for years. Guess I keep hoping things will get better. That maybe if enough decent people stay and try to make a difference, this place might turn into something more than just a graveyard with buildings." They reached the stairs that led to her room, and Clara turned to face him. In the shade of the building's overhang, his features seemed softer, more vulnerable. "Thank you again, Mr. Cordell. I owe you a great debt." "No debt," he said firmly, "but I would feel better knowing you get home safe each day. Would you mind if I met you after school tomorrow just to make sure no one bothers you?" Clara knew she should refuse, knew that accepting his protection would start talk, would link their names together in the gossip that flowed through Tombstone like water. But she also remembered the terror of being grabbed, the helplessness she had felt, and the way Cord had stepped in without hesitation. She nodded. "I would appreciate that. School lets out at 3:00. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and chasing away some of the shadows in his eyes. "I will be there." True to his word, Cord was waiting outside the schoolhouse when Clara dismissed her students the next afternoon. The children noticed him immediately, the boys pointing and whispering about the gun on his hip, the girls giggling behind their hands. Clara felt her face warm as she ushered them out, very aware of the curious looks they gave her and the tall cowboy. As the last child scampered away, Cord approached with that same easy smile from the day before. "Good afternoon, Miss Whitmore. How was your day?" "Busy," she replied, gathering her books and papers. "We are working on multiplication tables, and some of the older children are struggling." They fell into step together, walking through the dusty streets as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Cord told her about his day working with horses at the ranch where he was employed, breaking in a particularly stubborn mare that had thrown him twice before finally accepting the saddle. Clara found herself laughing at his description of landing in the water trough, genuinely laughing in a way she had not since arriving in this violent town. This became their routine. Every afternoon, Cord met her at the schoolhouse and walked her home. At first, they talked about surface things, safe topics like the weather and the town gossip. But as days turned into weeks, their conversations deepened. Clara told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about losing both parents to fever and deciding to come west to start fresh. Cord shared stories about his childhood in Texas, about a younger sister he had not seen in 5 years, about the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the middle of the night, echoes of the war and all the death he had witnessed. They were sitting on the steps outside her room one evening in late July when gunshots rang out from the direction of the Oriental Saloon. Clara flinched instinctively, and without thinking, Cord moved closer, his arm coming around her shoulders in a protective gesture. They sat frozen like that, listening to the shouts and the sound of running feet, waiting to see if the violence would spread. When silence finally returned, Cord did not immediately pull his arm away. Clara found herself leaning into his warmth, her head resting against his shoulder. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate being afraid all the time. Hate knowing that any moment could be someone's last." "I know," he said softly, his breath stirring her hair. "I have hated it for years, but having you here, walking with you, talking to you, it makes this place more bearable. You make me remember why I wanted things to be better." Clara lifted her head to look at him and found his face mere inches from hers. She could see the individual flecks of color in his eyes, could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Cord," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, knowing only that something had shifted between them, something profound and terrifying and wonderful. He seemed to understand without her needing to find the words. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. "Clara, I know I have no right. I am just a cowboy with nothing to offer but a horse and a saddle and a gun. But I cannot stop thinking about you, cannot stop wanting to keep you safe, to see you smile, to hear you laugh. You have become the best part of my days." Her heart was racing, but not from fear this time, from hope, from possibility, from the intensity of feeling that had been growing in her chest for weeks. "You have become that for me too," she admitted. "When I see you waiting for me when we walk together, I feel safe for the first time since I came to this place. I feel like maybe there is goodness here, like maybe the violence does not have to win." Cord leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Clara did not want to retreat. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and careful, a kiss that held question and promise in equal measure. Clara's eyes fluttered closed, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a bit faster, Cord rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly, Clara. Want to do this right. You deserve that." "I would like that very much," she whispered. Their courtship became the talk of Tombstone, the proper school teacher and the quiet cowboy who had claimed her heart. They attended church socials together, took evening walks when the worst heat of the day had passed, sat on her steps and talked until the stars filled the sky. Cord was unfailingly respectful, always mindful of her reputation, but Clara could see the depth of feeling in his eyes every time he looked at her. It was late August when the violence that had been simmering in Tombstone finally erupted in a way that threatened everything. Clara had just finished teaching for the day when she heard horses thundering down the main street, their riders whooping and firing guns into the air. She recognized them as members of the Cowboy faction that had been causing trouble for months, drunk and dangerous, and spoiling for a fight. Cord was late, and Clara felt worry twist in her gut. He was never late. She waited inside the schoolhouse, watching through the window as the Cowboys continued their rampage, shooting out windows and terrorizing anyone unlucky enough to be on the street. When one of them grabbed a woman and tried to drag her toward the saloon, Clara made a decision. She could not just hide while others suffered. She slipped out the back door of the schoolhouse, intending to make her way to the marshal's office to get help. But she had gone only a block when someone stepped out of an alley, blocking her path. It was the same man who had grabbed her that first day, the one Cord had sent away. Recognition flared in his bloodshot eyes, along with something mean and vindictive. "Remember me?" he sneered, advancing on her. "Your cowboy boyfriend humiliated me. Think it is time I returned the favor." Clara backed away, Her mind racing through options. She could scream, but would anyone hear her over the chaos on the main street? Could she run fast enough to escape? The man kept coming, backing her into the narrow space between two buildings where no one would see. "Leave her alone, Chet." Cord's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. He stood at the mouth of the alley, and Clara had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. But her relief was tempered by fear when she saw the man called Chet turn with his hand on his gun. "This is between me and her," Chet said, but his voice had lost some of its bravado. "You got no call interfering again." "I have every call," Cord replied, moving into the alley with careful, measured steps. "That woman is everything to me, and I will not let you or anyone else hurt her. So you have a choice, Chet. You can walk away right now and live to see tomorrow, or you can draw that gun and see how that works out for you." Clara held her breath. She had seen enough shootouts to know how quickly they could turn deadly, how one wrong move could mean death. But Cord's presence was different from the usual gunfighters who swaggered through town. There was no bravado in him, no desire for violence, just a quiet, absolute determination to protect her. Chet's hand hovered over his gun, indecision written across his face. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Chet seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping. "She ain't worth dying over," he muttered, but he pushed past Cord and stumbled out of the alley. Cord moved immediately to Clara, his hands running over her arms, checking for injuries. "Did he hurt you? Are you okay?" "I am fine," she said, but her voice shook. "Cord, thank you. Again. You keep saving me." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Clara could feel his heart pounding, could feel the fine tremor in his muscles that spoke of the adrenaline still coursing through him. "I will always protect you, Clara, always. I cannot stand the thought of anything happening to you." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "This town is too dangerous, Cord. I see it now. The violence, the death, it will never end here. Men like Chet will keep causing trouble, and one day you might not be there in time, or you might get hurt trying to save me." Something shifted in his expression, determination replacing the last traces of fear. "Then we leave. We get out of Tombstone, find somewhere better." "What?" Clara blinked, not sure she had heard correctly. "I have been thinking about it for weeks," Cord said, the words coming faster now. "I have some money saved up, enough for a stake. There is land up north near Prescott where a man could start a ranch. It is quieter there, more settled. We could build something good, something clean, away from all this death and violence." Clara's mind reeled. "Cord, are you saying—" "I am saying I love you, Clara Whitmore." He cupped her face in both hands, his gray eyes blazing with intensity. "I have loved you since that first day, I think, when you looked at that dead man with such sadness, like you actually cared that another human being had died. Most folks here have gotten so used to killing that they don't even blink anymore, but not you. You still see the tragedy in it, still believe things could be better. You make me want to be better, to build something worth having. So yes, I am asking you to marry me, to come with me and start a life somewhere we don't have to be afraid all the time." Tears streamed down Clara's face, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of hope finally blossoming after months of fear. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, Cord, I will marry you. I love you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid that loving someone in this place just meant giving death another way to hurt me. But you have protected me from that fate, kept me safe when so many others were not. I want to build that life with you. Want to go somewhere we can just be happy without waiting for the next gunshot." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and relief and promise into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling despite the danger still lurking on the main street. They made their plans quickly. Cord gave notice at the ranch, collecting the wages owed to him. Clara spoke with the school board, explaining that she was leaving to get married. Some of the townspeople tried to convince them to stay, but most understood. Tombstone was dying, its silver mines playing out, its reputation for violence driving away the decent families that might have made it a real town instead of just a collection of saloons and gambling halls. They were married in a simple ceremony at the church, with only a handful of witnesses present. Clara wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Cord looked uncomfortable but handsome in a borrowed suit jacket. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt something inside her relax for the first time in months. She was no longer alone in this dangerous place. She had Cord, and together they would find somewhere better. They left Tombstone on a bright September morning, everything they owned packed into a wagon pulled by two sturdy horses. As they rode out of town, Clara did not look back. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the horizon and the promise of a new beginning. The journey to Prescott took nearly a week, following rough trails through the territorial wilderness. At night, they camped under the stars and Cord held Clara close, keeping watch for dangers both human and animal. During the day, they talked about their dreams, about the ranch they would build, about the children they hoped to have someday. Away from Tombstone's violence, away from the constant threat of death, Clara felt herself coming alive in new ways. She laughed more freely, smiled more often, felt the fear that had become her constant companion finally beginning to fade. They reached Prescott in mid-September, and Clara immediately understood why Cord had chosen this place. Set in the mountains at a higher elevation, it was cooler and greener than Tombstone, with actual trees and grass instead of just desert scrub. The town had law and order, a real government for families with children playing in yards behind white picket fences. It felt like civilization, like hope, like home. Cord had corresponded with a land agent before they left, and within days of their arrival, they had purchased 200 acres of good grazing land about 5 miles outside of town. The property had a small cabin that needed work, but the land itself was beautiful, with a creek running through it and mountain views that took Clara's breath away. They threw themselves into the work of building their ranch. Cord spent long days repairing the cabin, adding rooms, making it solid and weatherproof before winter arrived. Clara planted a garden, sewed curtains, turned the rough shelter into a home. They purchased a small herd of cattle and some chickens, the beginnings of what they hoped would grow into a prosperous operation. The physical work was hard, harder than anything Clara had done in her life, but she threw herself into it with determination. Every post cord sunk into the ground, every vegetable that sprouted in her garden, every improvement they made to the property felt like a victory over the violence and chaos they had left behind. Here they were building something that would last, something good and clean and theirs. Winter came, bringing snow to the mountains and long evenings where Clara and Cord sat by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. Clara had brought some of her teaching books with her, and she began teaching Cord to read better. He had only basic literacy learned during stolen moments in his childhood, but he proved to be a quick study. His favorite thing was when Clara read aloud to him, her voice bringing stories to life, while the wind howled outside their snug cabin. It was during one of those long winter evenings that Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she was finally certain, she told Cord over dinner. He stared at her for a long moment, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, and then a smile spread across his face so wide and genuine that it made her heart sing. "A baby," he breathed, setting down his fork and coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. His hand came to rest on her still flat stomach, wonder written across his features. "Clara, we are going to be parents." She covered his hand with hers, tears streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You have given me everything, Clara, a home, a purpose, and now this. I never thought I would have any of it. Never thought I deserved it after all the things I saw and did." Clara cupped his face in her hands. You deserve all the happiness in the world, James Cordell. You are the best man I know, and you are going to be an amazing father." Their son was born in late June of 1883, during a thunderstorm that shook the cabin's rafters. Clara labored through the night with Cord holding her hand, a midwife from town coaching her through the birth. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and howling with healthy lungs, Clara sobbed with relief and joy. Cord cut the cord with shaking hands, then held his son for the first time, this tiny, perfect human they had created together. They named him Thomas, after Cord's father, and he became the center of their world. Clara marveled at how something so small could contain so much love, how she could watch him sleep for hours and never grow bored. Cord proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow always soothed the baby. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered, their cattle herd expanded, and Cord proved to have a gift for breeding and training horses. Wealthy buyers from as far away as California came to purchase his animals. Impressed by their temperament and quality, Clara started teaching again, offering lessons to children from neighboring ranches who came to their home 3 days a week. The income helped, but more than that, it gave her a sense of purpose beyond her own family. They heard news from Tombstone occasionally, stories of continued violence and decline. Several more men had been killed in shootouts. The silver was playing out, and people were leaving in droves. When word came that the man called Chet had been shot dead in a saloon brawl, Clara felt a complex mix of emotions. She was not glad anyone had died, but she could not deny a sense of relief that he would never be a threat again. More than anything, those stories reinforced how right they had been to leave. Here in Prescott, Thomas could grow up safe, could play in their yard without his parents worrying about stray bullets. He would go to school, would learn to read and write and figure, would have opportunities beyond violence and gunfighting. The violent death that had been so common in their old world seemed like a nightmare from another life. 2 years after Thomas was born, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had Cord's gray eyes and Clara's dark hair, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Watching Cord with his daughter, seeing the fierce love and protectiveness in his eyes, Clara understood in a new way what it had meant for him to protect her all those times in Tombstone. This was what it felt like to love someone so much that the thought of them being harmed was physically painful. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and family. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Sarah was more wild, always climbing trees and getting into mischief, making her parents laugh with her antics. Clara and Cord's love deepened and matured, becoming something richer and more complex than the urgent passion of their early days. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with just a glance, move through their days in the easy partnership of two people who had built a life together from nothing. It was 1890, 8 years since they had left Tombstone, when they received word that the town was essentially dead. The mines had closed, most of the population had moved on, and what remained was a ghost town haunted by memories of violence. Clara and Cord sat on their porch that evening, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the mountains, and reflected on how different their lives could have been. "If you had not been there that day," Clara said softly, leaning against Cord's shoulder, "if you had not stopped Chet from grabbing me, I do not know what would have happened. I could have been just another victim in a place where victims were counted by the dozen." Cord's arm tightened around her. "I could not let that happen. From the moment I saw you, something in me knew I had to protect you, that you were important, that you mattered in a way nothing else had for a long time. You saved me," Clara said, "not just that day, but every day after, every time you walked me home, every time you stood between me and danger. You were choosing my life over the violence that surrounded us. You protected me from the fate that took so many others." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes still as intense as they had been that first day, though now they held warmth instead of shadows. "And you saved me right back. You gave me a reason to leave that place, to build something better. You showed me that life could be about more than just surviving, that there could be love and peace and purpose. We saved each other, Clara." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 8 years of shared life, of struggles overcome, of love that had only grown stronger with time. When they pulled apart, Thomas was making faces at them from the yard, declaring parents kissing to be gross, while Sarah giggled behind her hands. "Our children will never know what it was like," Clara said, watching them play. "They will grow up safe, never having to wonder if each day might be their last. That is the greatest gift we could have given them." "That and each other," Cord added. "They will grow up knowing what real love looks like, what it means to build something together. That is worth more than all the safety in the world." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family went inside together. Clara lit lamps while Cord got the children ready for bed. Later, after stories had been read and prayers had been said, after Thomas and Sarah had finally settled into sleep, Clara and Cord lay together in their own bed, comfortable in the darkness. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked, at the excitement, the danger. Cord was quiet for a moment, considering. "No," he finally said. "I spent years in that world, always on edge, always waiting for the next fight. This is better. This peace, this life we have built. Our children sleeping safely in the next room, you beside me every night. This is everything I ever wanted but never thought I could have." Clara smiled in the darkness, contentment washing over her. They had come so far from that dusty street in Tombstone, from the place where violent death was so common it barely drew comment. Cord had protected her from that fate, had stood between her and the darkness again and again until they could escape to somewhere better. And together they had built a life filled with love and purpose and peace. The years continued to unfold, bringing new challenges and joys. The ranch grew more prosperous, allowing them to hire help and expand their operations. Thomas showed an aptitude for numbers and helped manage the business side of things as he grew older. Sarah developed a gift for working with horses, able to gentle even the most stubborn animals with patience and kindness. Clara's teaching grew into a small school, with families from all over the region sending their children to learn from the dedicated teacher who had brought education to their rural community. Cord remained the steady center of their family, his quiet strength and unwavering love providing the foundation on which everything else was built. He never fully lost the watchfulness that had been ingrained in him by years in violent places, but here it was gentled, turned toward protecting his family in everyday ways rather than against gunmen and outlaws. He taught his son to ride and shoot and work with his hands, but more importantly, he taught both his children about honor and kindness and the importance of standing up for what was right. When Thomas was 18 and Sarah 16, they expanded the ranch house, adding more rooms to accommodate their growing children and the grandchildren Cord and Clara hoped would eventually come. The building project brought back memories of those early days, working together to turn a rough cabin into a home. And Clara and Cord often found themselves reminiscing about the journey that had brought them here. One evening, as they sat on the expanded porch that now wrapped around 3 sides of the house, Clara brought up something she had been thinking about for a while. "Do you think we should tell them the whole story? Thomas and Sarah, I mean. About how we met, about what Tombstone was really like?" Cord considered, his gaze distant. "They know some of it. Know we came from a rough town, that things were dangerous there. But they do not know the details," Clara pressed. "Do not know about Chet grabbing me, about all the times you saved me, about how common death was, how close we came to being just more victims of that violence." "Why tell them now?" Cord asked, not arguing, but genuinely curious about her reasoning. Clara thought about it, trying to put her feelings into words. "Because I want them to understand what we built here. Want them to know that the peace and safety they have always taken for granted was something we fought for, something we chose, that their father was a hero, even if he does not think of himself that way." Cord's ears reddened, embarrassed. I was not a hero, Clara. I just did what any decent man would do. That is exactly my point, she said firmly. You were a decent man in an indecent place. You chose to protect me, to protect others, when you could have just looked away like so many did, and then you chose to leave, to find somewhere better, to build this life for us. That matters, Cord. That is a story worth telling. So that evening, after dinner, with the whole family gathered in the expanded living room that still held the same fireplace where Clara and Cord had spent their first winter together, they told the story. They told about Tombstone in its violent heyday, about gunfights in the streets and death as common as dust. Clara told about being grabbed by Chet, about her terror, about the tall cowboy who had stepped in without hesitation. Cord told about walking her home every day, about falling in love with the teacher who still believed in goodness despite being surrounded by violence. They told about the decision to leave, about buying the land and building the ranch from nothing, about the struggles and the triumphs, about the deliberate choice to create something different, something better. Thomas and Sarah listened in silence, their eyes wide as they heard the full story for the first time. When Clara and Cord finally fell silent, Thomas spoke first. I knew it was rough there, but I did not realize how bad it really was. How many times did you save Mother, Father? Cord shook his head. I do not know. Lost count. What mattered was not the number of times, but that she survived. That we both got out before the violence took us like it took so many others. You were brave, Sarah said softly, looking at her father with new eyes. Both of you. To live in that place and still believe things could be better. To leave and start over with nothing. That takes courage. Or desperation, Clara said with a small smile. We were desperate for something better, for a life that was not defined by fear and death, and we found it here, together. The conversation continued late into the night with Thomas and Sarah asking questions and Clara and Cord sharing memories they had not spoken of in years. By the time everyone finally went to bed, Clara felt lighter, as if sharing the story had lifted a weight she had not even realized she was still carrying. Life continued its forward momentum. Thomas married a girl from town, a blacksmith's daughter named Emma, who was practical and kind and fit seamlessly into their family. They built a house on the ranch property, and within a year, Clara and Cord became grandparents to a squalling baby boy they named James, after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Cord cried openly, overwhelmed by the continuation of the life he and Clara had built. Sarah proved more independent, taking her time about courting, until finally meeting a traveling horse trader who appreciated her skill and spirit. They married and stayed on the ranch as well, Sarah continuing her work with the horses, while her husband helped expand their breeding program. As Clara and Cord moved into their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day work of running the ranch, allowing their children to take over while they enjoyed a slower pace. They spent their days working in the garden, taking long rides through the property they had built together, playing with their growing number of grandchildren. The violent world of Tombstone seemed like something from another lifetime, a nightmare that had finally faded in the light of day. It was 1905, 23 years after they had left Tombstone, when they received word that the town was being revived as a tourist attraction, people fascinated by the stories of the Wild West days. A newspaper reporter came all the way from New York to interview old-timers who had lived through Tombstone's violent heyday, and somehow, he tracked down Clara and Cord. They agreed to speak with him, sitting on the porch that had seen so many important conversations over the years. The reporter, a young man who seemed impossibly naive about what the real West had been like, asked them about shootouts and outlaws, clearly hoping for exciting tales of adventure. But Cord steered the conversation away from glorifying the violence. People want to hear about gunfights and brave marshals, he said, but what they should understand is that all that violence was not romantic or exciting. It was terrifying. Good people died for stupid reasons. Children lost parents, wives became widows, all because too many men thought disputes should be settled with guns. Clara added, What saved us was not violence, but the decision to leave, to find somewhere we could live in peace. The real story is not about who was the fastest draw, but about the people who survived and built something better. The reporter took notes, though Clara suspected their story would not make it into his final article. People wanted legends and myths, not the truth about fear and survival and the deliberate choice to walk away from violence. After he left, Clara and Cord sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains that had been the backdrop to their life together. "Do you think anyone will remember?" Clara asked. "Not the gunslingers and the outlaws, but people like us? The ones who just tried to survive and build decent lives?" "Probably not," Cord admitted. "But that does not matter. What matters is that we lived it, that we created this." He gestured at the ranch spread out before them, at the houses where their children and grandchildren lived, at the land they had tended for over 2 decades. "This is our legacy, Clara. Not a name in some history book, but a family that knows love and safety. Children who will grow up and have children of their own, passing down what we built here." Clara reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You protected me from so much, Cord, from violence and death and fear. You gave me this life." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "We gave each other this life. Every day I am grateful that I was standing on that street, that I saw you being threatened, that I had the courage to step in. You were worth fighting for, Clara. Worth everything." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they went inside together, still hand in hand. Behind them, lights glowed in the windows of their children's homes, evidence of the family they had created, the life they had built from courage and love, and the determination to find something better than violence. The years grew shorter as Clara and Cord moved into their 60s, their hair graying, their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. They watched their grandchildren grow, attended more weddings, welcomed more great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas and Sarah's management, and Clara's school became an established institution in the region, with other teachers hired to help manage the growing number of students. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out into the yard, 3 generations of the family that Clara and Cord had started with nothing but love and hope. As Clara looked around at all the faces, seeing Cord's eyes reflected in his descendants, his strength and kindness passed down through the generations, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone else had gone home or to bed, Clara and Cord walked out to the creek that ran through their property, the same creek that had been there when they first saw this land 30 years earlier. The moon was full, casting silver light across the water, and the night was peaceful, filled only with the sounds of crickets and the gentle burble of the stream. 30 years, Clara said softly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we left Tombstone. Other times it feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago," Cord replied. "We were different people then, younger, more scared, not sure if we could really make this work." "Did you ever doubt?" Clara asked. "Ever wonder if we made the right choice?" Cord turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Even in the moonlight, even with age marking both their faces, Clara could see the same intensity in his eyes that had been there that first day in Tombstone. "Not once," he said firmly. "Every day with you has been a gift, Clara. Every moment we have built together, every child and grandchild, every sunrise over these mountains, it has all been worth it. You were worth leaving everything for, worth starting over for, worth building a whole new life for." Tears streamed down Clara's face, but they were happy tears, tears of joy and love and contentment. "I love you, James Cordell. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many more we are given. And I love you, Clara Cordell. You made me believe in goodness again, made me want to be better than I was. You gave me a reason to leave the violence behind and find peace. I will spend the rest of my life grateful that I was on that street in Tombstone, that I had the chance to protect you, that you agreed to build this life with me." They kissed under the moonlight, surrounded by the land they had tended for 3 decades, secure in the knowledge that they had succeeded. They had escaped the world where violent death was common, had built something better, something lasting. Their children would carry on the ranch and the values they had instilled. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing love and safety. The legacy they left would not be of violence, but of peace chosen deliberately and maintained through love. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Clara thought about that frightened young school teacher in Tombstone, about the moment when rough hands had grabbed her and she had thought she might become just another victim. She thought about the cowboy who had stepped in without hesitation, who had made protecting her his purpose, who had loved her enough to leave behind everything familiar and start fresh in a new place. Violent death had been all too common in their world, but Cord had protected her from that fate always. And together they had created a new world, one where their children and grandchildren would never have to know that kind of fear, would never have to wonder if each day might be their last. That was the real story, the one worth telling. Not tales of gunfighters and outlaws, but the story of two people who had chosen love over violence, peace over chaos, and who had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Inside their house, the fire still burned in the hearth, the same hearth that had warmed them through their first winter together. Clara and Cord settled into their chairs, comfortable in the silence, in each other's presence, in the life they had created. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal, watching over the ranch and the family sleeping peacefully within its boundaries, all of them safe, all of them loved, all of them protected from the violent world that Clara and Cord had left behind so many years ago.